Back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Delighted to have my guest on again. He's been on several times, John Lott. He is considered one of the country's leading authorities when it comes to the issue of guns, and always delighted to have you on the program. How are you, Dr. Lott?
Doing great. Good to talk to you again.
You bet. Always enjoy having you on. You know, what you're doing there, I think, is so important, and I love your book, More Guns, Less Crime. I'm sure that makes people's skin crawl, but, it's just common sense. It just comes down to, there's all these little cliches, and cliches largely exist because there's truth to them. An armed society is a polite society, and I just look at my visits to Chicago versus my living in Houston, Texas, which demographically are very similar in terms of size and diversity. But I tell you, Houston's a lot safer. And a lot of it has to do with attitudes regarding guns. And so these are things that simply aren't talked about in the real debate. And you look at things like Sandy Hook, where the perpetrator of that horrific crime in that elementary school committed 73 felonies in the process. And this idea of adding more laws that would somehow prevent him from perpetuating those crimes is mind-boggling to me. And so I'm glad you're out there looking at the actual consequences and not merely speculating on how nice it would be if we behave differently than we actually behave.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem is that some of the gun laws that we have actually contribute to these types of problems. If you look, at least since 1950, with just two exceptions, every single one of these mass public shootings have occurred where people aren't allowed to have guns for protection. And what ends up happening is that law-abiding good citizens obey the rules, not the criminals, and rather than making it safer for the victims, you unintentionally make it safer for those who are engaged in the attack. And I suppose the easiest way to think about this is to ask, would you put a sign in front of your home that said your home is a gun-free zone? I mean, if you're really being stalked or threatened, would that be the safe thing to do? And I haven't run across even any strong gun control advocates that would put a sign like that in front of their home.
Yeah. Maybe a sign in front of their home that says my neighbor doesn't have a gun, but not the one saying they don't have a gun.
Right.
You pointed out something really interesting the last time I had you on the show. And since you and I talked, I've read Elliot Rodgers' manifesto, the 22-year-old who went on a killing spree in California.
Right.
He talked about choosing that location because of the fact that it was a gun-free zone. He explicitly said that. Thank you for posterity. I wish posterity would learn something from it. These people may be mentally ill, they may be evil, but there's no reason to believe they're stupid.
Right. No, I mean, the thing is that time after time in these types of attacks, these killers explicitly talk about the fact that they choose places where, there's no protection there. So you look at the Charleston case that we just had. Apparently his first target was supposed to be Charleston College, but he was worried that there was armed security there that would stop him. We just found out a couple months ago that James Holmes, who did the Batman movie theater shooting, when his diary was finally released, he had a discussion in there where apparently his first choice of target was Denver International Airport, but he, again, was worried that there was security there. If you look at the movie theaters, there were 7 movie theaters showing the premiere of the Batman movie within a 20-minute drive of his apartment. Only one of those movie theaters posted a sign banning permanent concealed handguns. He didn't go to the movie theater closest to his home. He didn't go to the one that advertised itself as having the largest auditoriums in the state of Colorado, which you think might be attractive on a premiere night where it's going to be booked solid. Instead, he went to the one movie theater that made it so that victims weren't able to defend themselves. You look at the Lafayette movie theater shooting. That also occurred in a gun-free zone. There's some evidence that he picked it because of that. Mm-hmm. You look at the shooting last year in Canada. I mean, I'm just going over recent cases. You look at in Canada and New Brunswick, that killer had pictures on his Facebook page about gun-free zones, making fun of them. He had one comic up there where a victim was stumbling, trying to run away from a killer, and as the killer was pointing the gun at the victim there, he was turning back and saying, "Look, guns are banned in these areas. You're not allowed to have a gun. It's illegal for you to shoot me here." Mm-hmm. And the killer basically has a bubble above his head, thinking the guy's a moron, apparently right before he shoots him. Yeah. So, I mean, you don't even need to try. You could just find time after time things that verify exactly what you're saying in terms of these guys purposely picking places where victims can't defend themselves.
Do you have a compilation of this current information? Because I know, to me it is so obvious, but so largely ignored. Is this compiled neatly somewhere?
Yeah, well, we have these cases listed on our website at crimeresearch.org. We also have a list of mass public shootings that were prevented by people who had permanent concealed handguns. I mean, just in the last few years, you can easily find several dozen of these cases around the country where police or prosecutors will say that if it were not for the presence of the concealed handgun permit holder, others would have died. Many others might have died.
I'm sure you know Dr. Charles Murray. I'm sure are you familiar with his latest book, By the People, Rebuilding Liberty Without Permission?
I haven't had a chance to read it, but I know it's out there.
Dr. Murray's latest book talks about lawsuits that need to be executed by people who believe in liberty, believe in freedom, in order to get our freedoms restored. That's how so many of our freedoms have been taken away, have been in the courtrooms. We need to be suing to get some of our liberty back. Seems like lawsuits against institutions like movie theaters that say they're gun-free zones but are not prepared to protect people in those venues should be sued.
Well, unfortunately, right now, President Obama's appointed about half the federal judges in the country, and if you add that on to the judges that are still around from the Clinton administration, you're talking about almost 70% of the judges out there. And so, the issue that you have to deal with is who's going to hear the case. And one thing is definitely sure, that President Obama, in deciding who to put on the courts, has been very careful to make sure that the people that he put on are very anti-gun. I mean, you just look at his Supreme Court appointments. Those individuals do not believe that there's an individual right to self-defense, let alone individual right to self-defense with a gun. And so when you got to be careful. If you bring cases, you could, even if it seems obvious to you or me or to Charles, you may end up creating bad precedent that makes it even worse for you.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. What kind of things are you advocating at Crime Research?
Well, I mean, we've been doing lots of different studies. We just put out a report recently on concealed handgun permits that have been increasing dramatically. In 2007, there were about 4.6 million Americans that had concealed handgun permits. Now it's about 13 million. And even that underestimates significantly the number of people who can legally carry, because now there are 10 states where you can legally carry without a permit in all or virtually all the states. And so, we just had 3 states in the last month and a half or so which have joined that list. So, I don't know how many people can legally carry, but it's a lot more than 13 million. And just in the last year, you've had about 1.7 million more people with permits. And what we show in the report, and people can get this at our website at crimeresearch.org, is that the states that have had the biggest increase in permits, in the percentage of the adult population with permits, have seen the biggest relative drops in murder rates. Mm-hmm. And that fits in with all the huge number of academic studies that show that.
Dr. John Lott, I appreciate your time. Dr. John Lott, crimeresearch.org. And I can assure you we're going to get you back on the show again. I appreciate your contribution in this conversation that every station, every person should be having, because it really is a matter of life and death. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you that best content here shows up over there at usatoreview.com. While there, like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter.